Appreciate everyone joining us from the west coast of the U.S. My compatriots over in Pacific time, um, and all the way to some of our colleagues who are joining us, um, or at least signed up, I believe, in the evening time in Asia. So, really celebrating the global effort that is Book and Claim and the global collaboration that is the Book and Claim community. Thank you for being here. Um, Wanted to introduce myself really quickly. I'm Quentin Barnes. I'm a program manager of market-based decarbonization at Smart Freight Center. You're going to be hearing from a few of the colleagues of the Secretariat. We happily and proudly host this community together with colleagues from RMI. So you will also get to hear from them, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well. But it's a pleasure to be here, and always enjoy getting to bring kind of out some of the things that we are working on in the community, out into light, into more of the community use. So, and hopefully you all can be good stewards of that and take those learnings along to your own organizations. This is a little bit of the agenda, that what we're going to be doing. Of course, a bit of welcoming here, but we're going to go through the kind of market landscape, on a high level, just update you on some things that are going on, announcements, as well as dive into kind of some of the systems that are continuing to develop in the book and claim space, by mode, as well as the multimodal systems. We're going to going through a little bit of reporting, um, looking at taking a look at inventory, use of book and claim, with inventory season just right around the corner, as well as tell you what the book and claim community has been working on in some of our expert groups and modal groups, that you may not have seen. Uh, so buckle up and put your book and claim hats on, and uh, again, thank you for being here. So, a little bit of the are you on the right plane? Are you going to the right destination? What are we doing here? We are trying to jumpstart, and accelerate transportation decarbonization, just plain and simple. Book and claim is one chain of custody tool in our tool belt. There are plenty of other ways, for folks to get involved in the decarbonization game and continue their goals. But the connecting power of a book and claim chain of custody to bring disparate demand and maybe local or other disparate supply together is recognized by those who are here at this webinar, and we hope to be able to bring those two groups together and ultimately drive more decarbonization in these complex supply chains. In our last newsletter, we actually had just a quick short piece on kind of when book and claim is an appropriate tool to drive that carbonization, and I would suggest you check that out. Go into a little bit more depth about some of those scenarios. Thanks to our board, as well as our strategic partners, for supporting this work, and being a good sounding board for various perspectives and assistance as practitioners in this space. Um, Very excited for you to be here as well. Again, we're hoping to have more opportunities where you can plug into this work. So listen up. Um, Two quick ways. One, the newsletter on the right. Many of you might have heard about this webinar as a result of that newsletter. It's both fun, but it's also a great way for us to get some of this work that we're doing and some of the perspectives out into the community. Thank you for sharing that. We've increased, I think, to a little bit over 300 different organizations who have clued into this work and about 900 people. So, so thank you. If you have any ideas of topics you'd like us to see, feel free to or deal with. Feel free to send us an email, and you can take a look at all the past newsletters on the bookandclaimcommunity.org website. The other thing I would point you to is our Principles and Best Practices publication. We published this in June on this summer, and one of the things we heard from you all in our survey at the beginning of the year was that you wanted some more kind of guidance and published documentation of what people are doing, how they are approaching the book and claim opportunity, the book and claim structures. And this document, I think, is a great example of that, and it really brings together 11 principles that organizations that are 35 people who graciously brought together their expertise and time. Everyone could agree on this. That was the idea of coming to a consensus point in the principles and their application via some best practices underneath each principle. So I really would recommend this as a document for you to take a look at. And please give us your feedback. Give us your opinions. Let us know how this document helped you, or where it could be potentially more clear. And just a reminder, it is kind of a snapshot in time. There are, some elements that might seem a little bit vague, or some things that might seem even more detailed than you anticipated. And that's, again, it's a reflection of that consensus amongst those organizations. So give us your feedback, and really, we kind of depend on this two-way street and interaction with you all who are out doing this decarbonization work. With that and a bit of introduction, again, thank you. And I will pass the mic to my colleague, Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. I'll just give a brief update about the state of play for book and claim in transport, with some notes about its application for other sectors as well. If you can go to the next slide. In general, I really want to emphasize that book and claim today is being utilized more and more and more to create deep impact in supply chains, despite the lack of clarity from some of the dominant accounting and reporting frameworks that would even further scale its adoption. As we've seen from many of the buyers' alliances, as well as bilateral deals, there's more and more money that's being channeled towards good, deep catalytic climate work that is packaged and enabled by specific book and claim mechanisms. To name a few, SABA, in its second procurement round as a joint RFP, channeled almost $200 million in investment towards sustainable aviation fuels. Zemba announced its first historic tender, channeling quite a sum of capital as well, and a number of large corporate customers in tandem with various carriers and fuel suppliers have enabled significant investment as well. So what we're seeing is this mechanism is already at work, enabling significant impact and creating good in the world, which is its intention. Next slide, please. So I'm going to dissect today just briefly a little bit more about what's going on behind that to enable some of this impact that we're seeing and some of the scale that we're starting to see emerge. First and foremost, there's a lot of effort that's gone in over the last many years to defining specific sustainability characteristics that specific interventions in supply chains have. For example, the RSB and ISCC certifications in deeply defining what sustainability means for sustainable aviation fuel supply chains. Some of these structures are really critical prerequisites to being able to book and claim legitimately. And we're seeing across the board in transport sectors and otherwise that these underlying certification systems are increasingly clear, and commonplace, i.e., more highly utilized to serve as this critical starting point for booking and claiming on a credible basis. That being said, the level of adoption and level of definition of some of these structures are still in flux in some places, noting that in aviation, these schemes are kind of increasingly clear and increasingly commonly adopted, but still some questions remain about how they interact, especially some of these specific regional schemes. In the maritime space, there's a lot of schemes that exist to define today's fuels and some of the future fuels, but there's a level of distinction between and a complexity in seeing between multiple tiers of these certification systems that apply to feedstocks versus fuels versus the transport work going into some of these book and claim approaches. And in the road sector, there's good definition on some of the fuel options in the works today, but less definition on some of these electricity-enabled solutions, which may need to be further developed to see scale in book and claim solutions. Next slide, please. On the broader book and claim specific standard side of things, we've also seen quite a bit of development as well as scale in this space over the last year. There are a number of increasingly cross-sectoral, even beyond transport, structures that are helping define what exactly book and claim systems should look like, what they should include, what they need to be able to do to guarantee level of credibility and consistency. A number of structures that look at specific modal approaches have existed now for several years and are increasingly maturing and now in an iterative process. For example, RSB's book and claim manual. And there are others specifically within the transport supply chain that are increasingly clear as well. For example, just highlight that the Smart Freight Center market-based measures framework has just launched an associated conformity assessment component that allows for kind of that specific accounting approach to be certified against as well. So we're seeing kind of more and more definition and clarity and structure around some of these book and claim approaches in practice, both in transport and more broadly. Next slide, please. As these approaches are clarifying, as are their delivery mechanisms. So specifically, registries are scaling rapidly in many of these use cases, and specifically looking at aviation, where we have, this is not necessarily a complete list, but indicative, quite a few registries that are serving the SAF certificate or similar use case that are actively operating, and then several more that are in development. In maritime, we're seeing a similar trend emerge where there are a couple registries that are functioning for this use case and others that are nearing launch as well, including the Maritime Book and Claim System is developed by RMI and the Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. In the road sector, this is less defined, but still kind of moving in a similar direction, and 123 Carbon is already serving that use case as well. One note that is increasingly emerging and top of mind for many of us in this space is that as registries come online to serve this delivery mechanism need for specific book and claim use cases, to the extent that there are multiple registries serving the same use case, there's a need to deeply consider interoperability systems so that we can manage, one, the risk of double counting and double issuance specifically, but also manage from a user interface perspective, the ability for these tools to be fundamentally useful and making sure that the registry landscape isn't too confusing and is still net helpful for folks that are trying to simply implement booking claim solutions in their supply chains. Next slide, please. One more kind of specific transport book and claim slide for me as a status update here. There is a lot of guidance that today exists to inform accounting and reporting for booking claim solutions in transport supply chains, and increasingly more broadly applicable guidance here too. This guidance right now is serving the need of filling accounting and reporting clarity gaps while awaiting the more definitive GHG protocol and science-based targets initiative guidance and standards. Noting that, and I'll get into this in more detail in the next few slides, GHGP and SBTI are in the process of developing standards that provide more clarity on this, and also calling out an external effort led by one of our strategic partners as the booking claim community. The AIM platform, or Advanced and Indirect Mitigation Platform, is developing relevant and consistent guidance that provides an even broader cross-sectoral perspective and helps companies get started with some really clear criteria and accounting approaches that they should consider in the near term before this GHGP and SBTI guidance might be finalized. Next slide, please. So just closing off here, wanted to talk about GHGP and SBTI just for a minute to provide a status update for those who may not be tracking these processes super closely. The core message here is that there is work going on here to further define how environmental attribute certificates or booking claim mechanisms, or whatever your terminology may be, fits in the context of these accounting and reporting frameworks. The SBTI standard revisions in particular are on track to provide more clarity. SBTI published 4 big research outputs in July of this year: a Scope 3 discussion paper, a compilation of some of the evidence that was submitted in late 2023 on the effectiveness of environmental attribute certificates, a synthesis report on carbon credits specifically, as well as an independent systematic review on the same. And they've clarified their plans to publish more of these materials in late 2024 and early next year. Specifically, what we're expecting to see is a draft corporate net zero standard in its second version for public consultation, and several more evidence synthesis reports on environmental attribute certificates in particular. I think today we just learned that SBTI is hosting a webinar on November 20th to take a deeper look through its plan to revise this corporate net zero standard. So we certainly plan to engage in that and would love to see others of you engage there too. Next slide, please. On the greenhouse gas protocol front, the message is similar. So the work has kicked off already to clarify market-based accounting as it applies to the greenhouse gas protocol framework, and specifically the emissions inventory, in a similar way that SBTI's process has kicked off. The standard update process began on September 30th with the creation of a technical working group that's looking at this work in particular. And I know that some of the folks on this call are within that group, and we wish them the best of luck in helping define what this looks like. The process is expected to be completed in the second half of 2026. And there are a number of representatives from the transport modes in this working group, which is helpful, but it's also, I'll note, a much broader kind of scope of work that potentially impacts every sector. So the representation is quite broad. We are, as the booking claim community, leaning deeply and trying to kind of understand the detailed considerations in both this process and the SBTI broader process as well. Noting that GHGP in particular has been quite transparent about the process that they've made so far, and we are following that along quite closely, but encourage those of you who are tracking this to do so as well. With that, I will pass off to my colleague Patrick from SFC to talk a little bit more about, in light of this GHGP and SBTI update process, what folks can do today.
Yes, thank you, Laura. And maybe to add another word also on the greenhouse gas protocol front. I mean, I have the luck of being in that working group that they called Actions and Markets Instruments, which has had already their first working meeting. And I mean, the good thing is that transparency for them is key, and all of the documents are already. Also, the presentation and the minutes from the first working meeting, you can find them online, which will also help us to give you some better insights and information and interpretations of what has been happening in those working groups, staying also closer to that. So making sure that it's not really a black box until they come out with something to test. Now we want to talk about a little bit about how to report on book and claim related emissions and how that is currently happening today. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Patrick. I am technical director at Smart Trade Center. I joined half a year ago, working on several things from emissions accounting to market-based measures, all around data and standardizations. And I think the most important thing about reporting, and you can already move one slide ahead, is that reporting should be happening and should be taking place in the real world. Because what we're all talking about, and now this is all animations, but I think we can unfold it a little. I think inventory accounting is important, and I think we're all working towards a recognition of the different accounting approaches for different chain of custody models into our emissions inventories. Luckily, there are some people who have already started going down that route and venturing these paths, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later. I think what's also very important to make, and we can already, I think, show the whole slide, is that the accounting approaches, of course, and how to put that into in your inventory drastically vary also by the chain of custody model. If you're having a direct provision of fuels to an asset like, I don't know, an electric truck or a direct fueling of a plane or a ship, then this is, of course, very easy because already today you can put those directly linked fuel activities into your carbon inventory and you can report on that. You can pass that on to your customers and everything is fine. It gets one step more complicated when you talk about mass balance approaches, meaning that if you are fueling an aircraft from an airport fuel farm, that might still be that might still be possible to allocate that because that's typically the way that that aviation fuels are distributed. However, and the challenge arises when you want to allocate that to customers in a sense of disproportionate allocation, because that is today already difficult. This difficulty continues with regulations on everything book and claim related, where you don't have any direct physical tie to the fuel or the energy that you're using, where at the moment both the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, its provisions, the ISO 14083, its provisions, and also the Science Based Target Initiative currently all recognize that it's an important thing to do, but they all haven't described any possible way of doing that. Having said all of this and going one step further ahead, you might ask the question, so what to do next? And what to do next, I think, is also quite simple. I think you can already click once more. I think I have to get rid of these animations in the future somehow because it's good in a presentation context, but maybe not so good in a webinar context. Sorry for that. Having said that, with the lack of acceptance in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the SBTI for that, there is currently no gold standard for including book and claim related certificate purchases in an emissions inventory. But I think it's important to start. And as Laura just mentioned, I mean, work at the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has been started, but since it's only be aimed to conclude in late 2026, the question is, what do I do until then? Because it's not an option to just wait another 2 years and let time fly by. So we can already look at what's out there. And luckily, we're not alone. So there have been some clever minds, and I'm sure you've heard about that story, that have thought about accounting for market-based emissions from electricity usage. If we go one slide further ahead, you'll see that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they published their Scope 2 reporting guidance, which is, as the name suggests, only for Scope 2, so only for emissions relating to electricity, and it introduces the concept of location-based and market-based reporting, meaning that there is an approach to what you physically have been using, as far as you want to say physically in an electricity context, but from the location where you are based, and with a market-based reporting concept, taking into account contractual agreements that you have made, such as purchasing renewable electricity certificates. They introduced a dual reporting requirement. So they said companies cannot be fine with doing either or, they have to do both. And the standard also outlines clear quality criteria that have to be fulfilled if you wanna obey to this one. It's well established. I think most of the companies are doing this today, and of course, it's implemented differently at every company. And taking these learnings, I think we have looked at a couple of examples, of real life examples, how other companies today are doing this, and we have brought some 3 examples from how this could look in a very separate way of presenting it to a very integrated way of presenting it. We've anonymized all of these examples that you see on the following slides. They are all also from members of our community. So if you come across any additional examples that we could showcase in the future and also to draw some learnings from, happy to I mean, if you have some examples, please send them along and we'll happily take them on board, because I think spreading the word on reporting is very crucial. Now, looking at the first example, this is a company who has obviously not very many emissions, and even less freight transportation related emissions, but they have some air travel related emissions. That if you click once more, you'll see in this highlight, apologies, that you see in this highlight here. So that company has caused 307,000 tons of CO2 equivalents in air travel in the last year. And if you look at their sustainability report, where this is taken from, and you scroll some further pages down the line, you'll find an interesting table on one of the pages, 2 or 3 pages further down. We have that on the next slide, where it basically talks about value chain mitigation measures and the use of sustainable aviation fuels. Now, if we click once more, you see that there is the same tank-to-wake air travel emissions that you have seen, and the company had been adding the well-to-tank emissions to arrive at a full life cycle emissions of, in this case, 370,000 tons. From that, they deducted 5,358 tons of emissions reductions they getting from the purchase of SAF certificates, leaving them with a residual total of 365,000. So this is an example of how you can keep it apart. The second example that we've brought is from another company who also leads off in their sustainability report with a great story of them establishing long-standing contracts for sustainable aviation fuels, mentioning total volumes, mentioning airline partners, and also mentioning certification frameworks like RSB in this case, which is adding to the narrative of fostering that. Interesting to see is how they put that into their quantitative reporting, which we can see on the next slide. So in their sustainability report, they are also reporting on their greenhouse gas inventory, which you can see on the left side. And you can also see that if we click once more, that in category 4, which is upstream transportation, so basically freight transportation outsourced, and category 6, business travel, that they report on a certain number of emissions there. What they are also doing, and you can see this table clearly labeled Table 1A, they published a Table 1B just on the next page of their report, and they call it greenhouse gas emissions by scope with management criteria. And as you can see here, they do some alterations to the greenhouse gas reporting they have done for these categories 4 and 6, basically outlining that they are including reduced emissions that came from the use of sustainable aviation fuels, bringing down their values in the individual categories by a significant number of tons. So this is a nice example of a dual reporting, how you can do that in 2 tables. And now rounding this part of examples up, we get to another company that has integrated that all of that into 1 table. So what they have basically done is a reporting of, if you want to say, gross and net emissions. And if we click once more, you can see that they have included a line item which they called reduction through market-based measures. And you can see that there are some values then with a minus in front. And if you look at the math and if you look at the tables and how they are rolled up, they will have a reporting, if we take scope 3, for example, of logistics related emissions without market-based measures. So basically adding up the emissions from categories 3, 4, and 6, like we've seen in the previous example, they come to a certain sum, and then they have built a net sum, which is basically the without market-based measures line minus the market-based measures, arriving at a net total. And this company has also chosen then to make even the net result the leading figure, which you can see at the top of the table, summing up to 33 million tons in this case. They also added some narrative in the reporting, which we're just going to highlight very briefly. I mean, you can read that later potentially. So basically, they are also saying like how they have done this going forward. So what did we want to say with these examples? And if we have a look at the next and last slide of this block, you can basically say that, so there is already a practice of reporting on reductions or reporting on emissions from book and claim. And despite the lack of formal acknowledgement by SBTi and by Greenhouse Gas Protocol, it is already possible. All of these examples that we have seen have undergone a level of verification. Some of them had been assured with a limited level of assurance. Some of them even have undergone a reasonable assurance, showing that reporting on this is already possible. These peer examples, they can of course serve as guides. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you're very welcome to share other examples that you might have come across or from your own companies. We're more than happy to expand this library of examples, because that's ultimately what it is about. So help to transparently set the precedent, start reporting on it, negotiate that. It will take time and it will take discussions also with verifiers how to transparently report on that. But if we can set a credible and transparent precedence, I think the world will be a better place. And this would also help making the case for the work at the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that this is already practice and this can actually happen in the future. So this is just that topic in a very nutshell. And I'm not sure to whom am I handing it back over. Is it back to you, Quentin, or?
Passing it to me, Patrick.
Oh, passing it to you, Claire. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And dive in here to our final section before going into Q&A. Thanks, Quentin, Laura, and Patrick so far for all the great information you've shared. The final section here is taking a step deeper into this community. And we've outlined the landscape, we've explained why we're here, but now what do we do? How does the book and claim community fit into all of this, into the greater book and claim landscape? So next slide, please. So as a whole, our outlined goal by Quentin, as Quentin mentioned at the outset, is to promote book and claim inside of heavy transport sectors. So how are we going to do that? We're going to work together to identify gaps in the sector. Where are there missing pieces? And then how can we fill those pieces? And we engage with the community to figure out what's most helpful. And then we work our best to execute and fill the gaps. So as has come up multiple times and always does naturally in book and claim conversations, is the SBTI and GHGP question. So on that front, we aim to be as engaged in those processes and informing in those processes as we can be. We have a regular accounting and reporting meeting where we hope to share additional updates and thoughts and concepts with our community. Patrick, as he mentioned, is participating in the technical working groups. And we also have coordinated engagement with our strategic partners, RSB, GMA, and ISCC on this front. Additionally, another larger bucket we're constantly engaged in is this education pool. We do things like what we're doing today, hoping to be a resource for you all in providing market landscapes and updates, hoping to cover from both the very expert technical side down to those that are new to book and claim, on what's going on, how does it work, how can we plug in, and hope to take some of that heavy lifting of standards tracking and certification tracking off of your plates, and we can do it on our end and share out in readouts like this. Additionally, as Quentin mentioned, accessible ways to keep up to date. The newsletter comes out monthly-ish, hoping to provide general sectoral updates, ways to plug in, updates on the book and claim community, etc. And then also the principles and best practices document is a great place to start or to sort of gut check your ways of thinking about book and claim and how to incorporate it into your organization. The last thing I'll mention, and Patrick gave a nice segue into this, I wanted to bring it up here. He mentioned sharing additional ways of accounting and reporting that you've seen in your daily life or in your organization. We also want to start leaning more into case studies and understanding how book and claim has worked in your sector, in your organization, etc. So we'll reach out with more information on that soon. But if you're interested in sharing your experience or a case study, we'd love to hear from you. And we want to make that an accessible resource to those that are in this great world trying to book and claim every day. Next slide, please. So more specifically, we also have active work streams running in a couple of different categories. These tend to change over time or change focus over time, but the two active ones we have running right now are this first one, the road stakeholder group, and then a registry group I'll dive into in a second. You may have noticed when Laura was going through the market landscape sides that there tended to be a trend of road being nascent in some way for various reasons. There's, just emerging registries, emerging standards and systems, but it's not quite as filled in as the aviation and maritime side. And that's due to a handful of reasons. It's a newer sector, there are technology questions, etc. But we see this jump out and we want to be there to fill that gap for the book and claim community sector as a whole. So our goal here in the road stakeholder group is to identify and fill the remaining gaps in the road transport book and claim ecosystem. We've already had our first convening, and we have our next convening coming up imminently, and we'd love your input, participation, feedback on the goals and outcomes of that group. So if you are in the if you are in the road transport book and claim ecosystem, please feel free to reach out and we can add you to that invite and community. Next slide, please. Other active work stream going on right now is our registry interoperability expert group. Laura mentioned in her conversation earlier on about the need for registry interoperability, particularly as registry ecosystems become little plumper and healthier, full of more actors and registries and options. Laura mentioned that there are sort of two primary interoperability questions with many sub questions that fall underneath, but one is preventing double issuance and double counting across registries. So helping with data confidence and preventing fraud and mistakes and things like that on a very tangible front. And then the other side is communication between registries, concepts like transferring certificates across registries or making this whole registry use case ecosystem easier and simpler and more functional for users across the registry landscape. Right now, the Registry Interoperability Expert Group is focusing on that first question of how we can prevent double issuance between these registries. And we're starting in the aviation space where this registry landscape is the most built up for now. If you are a registry operator, a fuel supplier, a registry user, and you have thoughts and questions on this front, we are happy to plug more folks in at any time, and we always appreciate feedback. So reach out if you'd like to join or have any questions on that work as well. All right. Next slide, please. And with that, you'll get a break from us speaking at you here for a little while, and we welcome your questions. There is a Q&A function here in the Teams webinar. We encourage you to use that to log your questions in there. I know we've already gotten a few come through, but feel free to keep adding, and we'll turn over to the team now. Before I go to Q&A, anything from the speakers, final thoughts, or anything you'd like to add? All right. If not, Quentin, I know you just answered in the text, but we had a great question about the big buzzword of additionality in the chat. So question about if there are any developments in the additionality guidelines in aviation or maritime sectors. Would you mind voicing your question out loud or adding any comments on that to the group?
Yeah, so the question for those who I guess maybe I have to make that public. But just someone said, "Hi team, just wanted to ask if there are any developments on the additionality guidelines in the aviation or maritime sectors." And the place that I answered and referred the query submittal question asker to is Principle 5 of the Principles and Best Practices document. That is, I think, probably the best spot when you're trying to think about how to approach the subject of additionality, including the consensus position from those creators of the Principles and Best Practices document, but also how to approach, for example, a client preference, or a preference from, say, a buyer's alliance in terms of how to approach that, and kind of stack the scale of what additionality means to the system, and then the person who is actually trying to buy the unit, accept the attribute, and how it fits into their impact strategy. There are, I think, a few more, especially with European policy, a few more concerns around kind of that barrier between just general accounting for low emission solutions and low emission services, and those folks who deal with those accounting concerns are trying to work with those policy makers and policy followers to ensure that people can just at a basic level report on their low emission solutions and low emission services independent of any booking and claiming, but within and underneath maritime policies like Fuel EU Maritime or aviation policy that's emerging for 2025.
Great. Thanks, Quentin.
Sure. Do you want to take the next one or what, or decide what?
Yeah, sure. I have another question I can pose to our group here. Pulling from the chat instead. I see we've got a lot of positive thumbs up and likes on this. The question is, does the book and claim community plan to facilitate or coordinate and submit feedback on the SBTI's draft revised corporate net zero standard in Q1 2025, supporting the use of book and claim in setting towards meeting scope 3 targets? Short answer, yes, but would love to open to my team for a longer answer on our plan there and thoughts on that front.
Sure, I can jump in here. Yes, this is one of our key activities that we like to do on a recurring opportunistic basis is the book and claim community. In two previous, or maybe even three, 2.5 previous public consultation opportunities, we've helped coordinate and provide templates or resources for other organizations that are looking to submit input to both the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and Science-Based Targets Initiative consultation processes. So we certainly anticipate organizing a response, whether in the form of, us sharing out some of our notes as the Secretariat with an opportunity for the community to reinforce those themes in some way, or depending on what the consultation process looks like, we might take a kind of more dedicated approach to this that more closely resembles our response to the call for evidence on environmental attribute certificates that SBTI released last year, and we put together a big package for as the community. So in short, yes, TBD what this exactly looks like. It'll depend on exactly the kind of container of the consultation prompt, but definitely get in touch with us and we'd love to coordinate on a response with all of you.
Great. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, generally we've advertised say, hey, get in touch with us if you want to compare notes via a newsletter. That's what we did last time for the Scope 3 response from SBTI, and thanks to those who did reach out. I think as the we also, I think, this was, a year goes by quickly. Last November, when SBTI had their call for evidence on environmental attribute certificates, we did submit kind of a full response as the community, as well, with a bunch of data from a poll that we offered to you all to respond to. So that was an amazing participation, a lot of great data in that response as well. So yeah, just stay tuned for some of these feedback opportunities, and of course, if there's some smaller feedback opportunity, or an open call for perspectives on book and claim systems, feel free to let us know those as well. Not necessarily just the big dogs of SBTI and GHGP. Let's see, we had in the Q&A section a question around the value of a Scope 1 or a Scope 3 credit, and noting that information is difficult to find. I agree. Laura responded with a note from Saba's experience in the RFP, and John from Kuehne+Nagel responded with road values. Not sure if you wanted to say anything else about that, Laura or John.
Maybe just one more note on this here. I think, one of the pieces that is overall difficult for folks in this relatively emerging market is kind of price knowledge and transparency. There's a number of efforts kind of on a sectoral basis that are working to create more clarity on this. And one of, we try to share this range in an anonymized way as a result of SABA joint procurement efforts as well, just to kind of inform market direction of travel. But also just noting that given the nature of the beast, there is inherently a very large range based on a number of variables in these markets right now. So kind of specific price matching is not something that we've seen to date.
Great. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I would also just note in the public responses from SBTI to that environmental attribute certificate call for evidence, there are a number of data points on price also. It can be worth exploring. There are hundreds of responses to that call for evidence. Of course, no one has an opportunity to read all of them. I don't know, maybe someone from SBTI did, but I've seen some data in a number of those different submittals as well. There was one question here: how is MBM usage connected to global government laws and policies? Are you aware of any case that MBM-based EACs can be used to comply against regional laws and policies? That's a great question, kind of on the intersection of regulation and voluntary activity. This might not be what comes to mind from some other people, but Patrick, if you wanted to, but there's also one of the interesting uses of EACs towards regional laws and policies that is easy to note is just RECs or GOs and guarantees of origin. So, I mean, within the low carbon fuel standard in California, for example, they have rules of how if one is bringing, say, green hydrogen to the California market, how can one corroborate that the electricity creating such hydrogen was renewable via EACs? So that's just straight off the bat one example from the electric market that kind of starts blending in, no pun intended, to transportation use. Patrick, did you have something else in mind?
One other example would, for example, be the Refuel EU aviation legislation, so which is demanding air fuel suppliers to provide, as of 2025, 2% of sustainable aviation fuels into European airports. They are, I mean, the legislation is written as a very strict document before opening it up to reality in one of their last paragraphs. One of them is called flexibility mechanisms, where they actually describe certain things that can happen until a certain point in time to ease the introduction of this. One of that is, for example, that fuel suppliers will not be forced to have 2% of sustainable aviation fuel blend at every airport, but they can have it as an average across multiple airports, already bringing in an aspect of mass balance. Furthermore, and further down in the text, they are also saying that they are exploring mechanisms like book and claim to allow fuel providers to also trade these certificates amongst each other to reach the 2%. They are still due to provide some additional clarification of what that means, which is slightly overdue, seeing that the legislation will come into effect in 7 weeks. But this is also what's planned. And I think that's the first example where this is explicitly also mentioned in the legislative text, that book and claim would be a valid approach to solving this issue of balancing supply and demand.
Great. Thanks, Patrick and Quinton. Jumping on to a next question here. I'm guessing, Laura, this one might get passed over to you, but question from Inez on the registry landscape in front. The question is, will marketplaces and bilateral agreements for certificates operate in parallel to registries, or is there an expected convergence? In aviation, how is interoperability between different registries expected to be ensured?
It's a great question. Maybe part by part. On the marketplace front, we've not seen a ton of development in, very, very tangibly in this space yet, but there's some movement and quite a bit of interest in that direction of creating a layer of marketplaces or trading platforms that ideally run in a very tightly connected way to registries to manage the credibility of those claims that are shared at marketplace function. There's also been some level of interest in creating a marketplace function that is kind of pre-registration of a SAF certificate in a registry, i.e. serving to kind of help clarify futures contracts and find buyers in advance of fuel and certificates getting produced. So there's some movement there and more kind of interest from market intermediaries that are right now serving as kind of kind of in between actors, between buyers and sellers of SAF certificates. So I guess we and others and encourage you all to watch that space as well to see how it evolves in the coming years. As far as the bilateral agreements component, yes, today the functionality of these contracts in relation to registry is typically a contract is signed that specifies a timeline and all of the other criteria for SAF certificate delivery, including most of the time a registry for delivery of those SAF certificates. And only after fuel is produced and certified in specifically sustainable certification schemes and all of these other prerequisite components are in place, does the registry hold and handle, be able to transfer and retire those certificates themselves. So innately, the contracting process, sharing of price information, etc., is separate from these, these core registries that simply track the attributes of the fuel and turn it into a booking claim certificate after all of those prerequisite steps occur. And then finally, on the interoperability question, this is still something that we're working deeply on. So there's quite a few efforts ongoing, including ours, to collectively with all of the other SAF certificate registries that exist today and some of the ones that are actively in development, define what the level of issuance prevention mechanism looks like. So right now there's no kind of there's not a ton of teeth to that, but there's a lot of buy-in and recognition for a need for this centralized mechanism that manages that risk. There are some efforts that are looking at the potential role of recognition frameworks or standardization that would help enforce an interoperability solution. But those pieces are currently operating largely in parallel.
Great. Thank you, Laura and team. With an eye to time, we have about 45 seconds to go, I think, before the top of the hour. So just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for hopping in to join us today, for the really great questions during the Q&A. Thanks to our speakers as well for providing great overviews and information. Please feel free to reach out to us with additional questions or thoughts at any time. We welcome you to stay engaged in the community as widely or narrowly as you'd like. If there are work streams that caught your eye, let us know. And links here to our website, newsletter, contact forms, etc., and our overall email that goes directly to us. Don't worry, it's not going robot first or anything there. So thank you so much and look forward to hearing from you soon.